6 times in that short passage, he says, "You have heard, or it has been said by them, but I say to you." Do you see what he's doing there? This is why they were astonished at his doctrine, right? Because he taught them as one having authority. He is saying, the law said don't commit adultery. But I, as the giver of the law, say to you, if a man looks after a woman to lust after her, he's committed adultery in his heart. You have heard it was said by them not to kill. And whosoever kills is in danger of hellfire, or danger of judgment. But I, as the one who is created life, say unto you that if you're angry at your brother without a cause, you'll be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, or that is, you are worthless, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of the hellfire. He's taking it, not taking the law further, but he is showing that mere formal acceptance of a rule system does not do anything for anyone. A relationship with the King of Kings presents a new life, a new kingdom, a new reality, a new authority, and there is rejoicing as we submit to the King. And so what he is primarily talking about here, and we're going to get to in the parable this morning, really is the theme of the next several parables we'll be looking at. And that is a theme of what it means to be a true follower of Jesus Christ. What it means to be a true disciple of Jesus Christ. There were 12 disciples, right? But he commanded those disciples to go and make disciples. And we're commanded to go and make disciples. A disciple is somebody who is a pupil, a learner under the feet of another that is greater than them. Jesus presents himself as the King. He presents himself coming to introduce a kingdom and how we must relate to the King. And there's much that he says in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We're not going to get into it. I just give you a few examples of that. And at the end here, he gives a parable, an illustration. And it's almost as if this is the high point of what he is saying in the entire Sermon on the Mount. This parable he gives. What is Jesus talking about in this parable that we read this morning? What is he talking about? Therefore, verse 24, therefore, based on what I've already said, that's what the word therefore means. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them. Verse 24, look down at verse 26. Okay? And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not. So what do we have here in this parable when we start to tear it down and look at it? Okay? We have Jesus basically asking or confronting the listeners, his disciples and others, with a question without asking a question. You say, what are you talking about? Been in the mountains too long. What I'm talking about is that he actually causes them to ask themselves a question by presenting a scenario to them. He doesn't actually ask them a question here. He simply causes them to have to ask the question to say, well, which one am I? Which one am I? He presents a scenario in which there are two choices a person can have here. A person is either one who hears and does, or one who hears and does not. Isn't that clear from the text what he's saying there? And he likens the illustration to each one of those. That which was just preached is what he's talking about. Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine. Whoever understands. If you hear the teaching on the kingdom, and I think in the broader sense, the word that he is speaking, but the emphasis is not on the hearing in this parable. The emphasis is not on hearing. The emphasis is on doing. Now, there is a much difficulty in understanding the Christian biblical idea between faith and works, isn't there? That's not that easy to understand. Even by people who are Christians, it's not always that easy to understand. Because we know that life is one of action, right? I mean, everyone here did something yesterday. I hope you did something. I mean, I hope you didn't just Even if you laid in your bed all day, you were doing something, right? You were laying in your bed. In other words, we can't communicate, we can't understand life. We live life with verbs, don't we? Doing, action. Yet at the same time, we understand the Bible teaches us that salvation and discipleship is not one of doing, but rather faith. But it's not one of faith without doing. And so there sometimes can be some confusion there. Sometimes we err on making too much of doing and not enough of faith. And sometimes we err on making too much of faith and not enough of doing. It's just a human problem we have. But he tries to give this illustration, and he makes it very clear that the action he is talking about here is not some nebulous action, as some might have said, if you don't know what to do, just do something. That's not the idea. Because he makes it very clear, he says, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them. There is an object of the action here. Doing what, I guess we could say. There's an answer to that question, doing what? He gives a principle, an illustration of a wise person and a fool. Now, I loved Jesus' teaching. I don't know if you've noticed this as we've gone through the parables, but he's just really good at finding ways to take a little stab at the Pharisees. You notice he constantly does that? Just a little stab at them. It's not a personal thing. Rather, they are in error. And he's just a mathematical teacher. And in a sense, what question would you ask? Just put yourself in their shoes. And everyone who's hearing. And the master, the great rabbi, the great teacher, he ends this long discourse by saying, sometimes the best questions are the ones not asked. He ends this discourse by saying, there are two kinds of people. Ones who hear and do, ones who hear and don't. The ones who hear and do are wise, the ones who hear and don't are fools. And he doesn't go any further. But you know what question's going on in everybody's mind, right? Is he calling me wise or a fool? Which one am I? Am I a wise person or am I a fool? And no one wants to be a fool. So the principle of wisdom in obedience to God and foolishness in disobedience is illustrated in this parable. It's a common sense parable he gives here. It's common sense. It makes sense. It's not a complicated parable. It's a very convicting parable, but it's not a complicated parable. And for those of you that have been going through our study of the parables here and remembering them, I try to point out every time we go through them some of the different opinions that I don't think hold water. It's no sense when I study this, I don't think there's any sense in trying to allegorize the parts of this parable. Jesus is telling a very simple illustration. And the point is, are you a fool or not? Are you wise or not? No sense allegorizing. Some have allegorized throughout the ages. Some have allegorized what the rock that the house is built upon is. Some have said it was Peter or a church or religion. Some have said it was Jesus is the rock in this passage. And even the little kid's song that sometimes we sing says that. But I don't think that's true. Yes, Peter does mean rock. Jesus is a rock. He's called a rock. He's the rock of ages. Peter is the rock, and the statement that he made is the rock upon which Christ will build his church, that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But that's far removed from this passage here. That's not what this passage is talking about. This passage is talking about a foundation. And it's just a simple common sense thing. Okay, if we're going to go out and build, if you're going to hire a contractor to build your house, I know the very first contractor you need to hire is a concrete contractor, okay? Well, after you get the architect and all that stuff, okay? Why? Because who in their right mind would go build a house and just put it on the dirt? Let's say that you're deciding you're going to build a mobile home. Something you're going to move. You know, you buy one, you bring it out. The guys put it on the train, on the truck, and they ship it from wherever it's coming from. They get to your site. And you remember how this site, some of you remember how this site used to look before we put a church on it? Remember the weeds everywhere, the bump, you know. What if we brought a mobile home and you just said, all right, put it down right there. And they slammed it down, and of course, because if you've ever seen mobile homes, the bottoms of them, maybe you have some floor sticking up now, and here and there, and boards popping through, or rocks came through. Well, does that make any sense whatsoever? You see, Jesus is trying to use a very simple illustration to say, what kind of fool would build his house on the shifting sands? What's going to happen when the storms come? The house is not going to stand. Look at the description of when the rain comes. Verse 27, the rain descends, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon the house, and it fell, and